Hi everyone! So this week we're going to be turning to a discussion of empiricist approaches to philosophy that were developing during the early modern period. We're going to start by looking at the philosophy of John Locke. So we're going to start out by looking at some background on Locke, looking at the goal of the essay in Locke's own words, and then we'll consider the sort of rational and empiricism debate in general so as to set the foundation for looking at Locke in the next few weeks. So we'll look at a debate about concepts and a debate about knowledge. Then lastly, we'll look at an initial argument that Locke gives for his empiricism. So first, just a bit of background on Locke himself. He lived from 1632 to 1704. He was given a privileged education at Westminster and then Christ Church, Oxford. And he lived a little bit after Descartes, though there was a tiny bit of overlap. And he worked with people that were highly influenced by Descartes' work. He also lived during the time of Boyle and Newton, who were also big influences on Locke. So Boyle and Newton were in modern period Europe, sort of very important figures in the development of natural philosophy, what we would now think of as the physical sciences. Now, he also had experience of studying medicine and working as a political advisor. In fact, he was a political advisor and sort of physician to one of Boyle's very close friends. Then he wrote the essay Concerning Human Understanding towards the end of his life in 1689. It was published in 1690. And this essay was hugely successful during his own time. And it's been incredibly influential. And so Locke's goal, he says, "This therefore being my purpose, to inquire into the origin, certainty, and extent of human knowledge, together with the grounds of degrees of belief, opinion, and assent." So notice there's two things he wants to study here. And he's already suggesting going beyond what people like Descartes were studying. First, he does want to study where our knowledge comes from, how it is that we can get certainty that something is true, and to what extent we can have certainty. So where does our certainty stop, so to speak? But even once it stops, there's still more to study, he says. We should think not just about knowledge, but also the grounds of degrees of belief, opinion, and assent. So here he wants to sort of suggest, look, even if we can't be certain, we can be more or less confident. When should we? What would make us so that we should be confident of something, even if we aren't certain of it? So he's moving and saying, look, philosophy ought to deal with the appropriate consideration of probability in addition to certainty or certain human knowledge. All right, so that's his goal. But he says, I shall not at present meddle with the physical consideration of the mind. So he's not going to sort of enter into what we might think of as sort of neuroscience today. He's not going to study what's going on in the brain, for instance, when we believe or know something. Nor is he going to trouble himself to examine in what its essence consists. So he doesn't really care, is the mind a physical thing or is it an immaterial thing? He also says he's not going to study by what motions of our spirits or alteration of our bodies we come to have any sensation by our organs, or any ideas in our understandings, and whether those ideas do in their formation, any or all of them, depend on matter or not. So he's not going to be studying the mechanical processes that produce our sensations or ideas. He's not trying to give a mechanical story. He's trying to give a sort of philosophical, conceptual understanding of these ideas and their production. All right, so he says, in order to do this, he's going to first inquire into the origin of our ideas, notions, or whatever else you please call them, which a man observes and is conscious to himself he has in his mind. All right, when he says an idea or notion, what he has in mind here is what we nowadays would call a concept. It's something in our mind that gives us the ability to represent or think about something else. So I have an idea or a concept of a table, of a computer, of numbers, of unicorns. These ideas, to say that I have an idea is not to say that I have a belief. It's not to say that I have knowledge. So I have the idea of a pink unicorn in my mind. I'm able to close my eyes and I can think about a pink unicorn. So the idea is what represents the pink unicorn, even when I'm not sort of seeing it, so in my own mind. The concept or idea is what allows me to represent and think about the pink unicorn in my mind. Now notice, I have that ability to think about that thing even though I don't have any knowledge about its existence, because it doesn't exist. I don't believe it exists. So ideas and beliefs are different things. But he says, secondly, once he explains where we get our concepts or ideas, well, I shall endeavor to show what knowledge the understanding has by those ideas and the certainty, evidence, and extent of it. So he's going to say, well, once we explain how we get those ideas, how can we use those ideas to get knowledge about the world around us? And to what extent can we get certainty? Where does that evidence come from? And what's the extent of our evidence? So this is where the probability might come in. Thirdly, I shall make some inquiry into the nature and grounds of faith or opinion. So here he has in mind sort of belief that is less than knowledge, but still might sort of have evidence in its favor. Well, what kind of evidence might it have, and to what extent, to what degree might it be probable given our evidence? A big portion of Locke's essay is going to be defending an empiricist approach to philosophy. Remember, there's a debate between rationalism and empiricism. So rationalism generally is a philosophical view that stresses the importance of a faculty of reason in accounting for the origin of our understanding and knowledge of things. And empiricism is a philosophical view that stresses the importance of experience, specifically sense experience, so sight, touch, taste, smell, hearing, for accounting for the origin of our understanding and knowledge of things. Now, these are not definitions. These are meant just to be some rough and ready initial characterizations. However, for our purposes in talking about Locke, it's going to be especially important to distinguish two different theses that are often associated with this debate. First, there's concept empiricism and concept nativism, which is the sort of rationalist view. Concept empiricism is the theory that all concepts in the human mind are ultimately derived from prior sense experience and then maybe our reflection on those experiences. Concept nativism, this is the theory that at least some concepts in the human mind are not ultimately derived from prior sense experience. So notice, this is a claim about the origin of our concepts. This says nothing about knowledge or belief. Remember, I have that idea of a pink unicorn. I don't know that pink unicorns exist because they don't. Also, I don't even believe that. So I'm just saying that ability to think about the unicorn, according to the empiricist, it has to be derived from prior sense experience or reflection on my previous sense experiences. According to the nativist, look, they might say maybe the pink unicorn concept comes from experience, but they're saying at least some concepts are sort of native to the human mind. They are not produced by our experience of the world. Now, knowledge empiricism and knowledge rationalism, these are proposed about knowledge itself. So knowing that certain ideas are true or false. So knowledge empiricism is the theory that all human knowledge is ultimately justified by sense experience. Knowledge rationalism is the theory that at least some knowledge is not ultimately derived from prior sense experience. All right, now, a couple questions you might have, though, about the rationalist views. If our concepts don't have their origin in sense experience, well, where do they come from then? Well, a nativist believes that at least some concepts are innate. The nativist believes that there's at least some sense in which some concepts, or ideas as Locke calls them, are sort of already stored in our minds from the first moment of our existence. So our mind comes sort of pre-packaged with this ability to think about those things. In the modern period, usually a nativist, someone who thinks that these concepts are innate, would say that they were sort of placed in our mind by God. Nowadays, nativism is still a rather popular position, but instead of saying that the sort of ideas, the concepts, or the ability to think about these things was produced in us by God, rather these things were sort of pre-programmed into our minds by the evolutionary process, so to speak. So, question 2, though. If some of our knowledge is not ultimately justified by our sensory experiences, then what does provide us with this knowledge, according to the rationalists? Well, according to the rationalists, it's our faculty of reason that provides this justification or knowledge that the ideas are true. So it's important to keep these two views clearly distinguished in your mind, the difference between concept empiricism and knowledge empiricism. Locke tends to conflate the ideas. I mean, he didn't actually have these distinctions because they were working in the time where they were trying to produce these different sort of positions. Now, so we can sort of benefit sort of looking back. But Locke himself sort of seems to think of innate ideas as being equivalent to innate knowledge. And I think he might make a couple mistakes because he conflates those two views. Now, Locke himself also seems to accept both kinds of empiricism. However, it's important to note that you could accept one version of empiricism while rejecting the other. So, for instance, one could hold that all our concepts are derived from prior sense experiences, but deny that those sensory experiences are what serve as the grounds or evidence for our knowledge. So, as an example, you might hold that you need sensory experience in order to entertain the thought that 2 plus 3 equals 5. So you say, where do we get our idea of 2, of 3, of addition? And you might say, look, it's via our experience of the world that we sort of get sort of concepts, the ability to think about numbers and addition. But once you're able to think about numbers, so 2 plus 3 equals 5, well, look, I can think about 2 plus 3 equaling 13. And I think about that and I realize that it's false. I realize that 2 plus 3 equals 5 is true. Well, even if getting the ability to think about each of those things requires experience, where does my knowledge of that come from? You might say, still my knowledge, once I have the ideas, I just need to use my reason to notice that these things are true. So you should keep this in mind when you're trying to evaluate some of Locke's claims. Some of his claims seem more focused on the thesis about concepts, and others seem more focused on the thesis about knowledge. Now, he does have an initial argument that I want to present to you. He says it would be sufficient to convince unprejudiced readers of the falseness of this supposition, that there are innate principles. So he uses this to cover both innate ideas and innate knowledge. He says, if I should show, as I hope I shall in the following parts of this discourse, how men, barely by the use of their natural faculties, may attain to all the knowledge they have without the help of any innate impressions, and may arrive at certainty without any such original notions or principles. So he says, look, if you're coming to this sort of neutrally, if I am able to show how you can get from experience to the knowledge that we have and to the ideas that we have, that should be enough to prove that there are no innate sort of principles, ideas, or knowledge. Why not? He says, for I imagine anyone will easily grant that it would be impertinent to suppose the ideas of colors innate in a creature to whom God has given sight and a power to receive them by the eyes from external objects. So he says, look, if we can get these ideas of colors from our sight, there's no reason for God to sort of implant them in our minds sort of innately, sort of from birth, because we already have a way to get them. There's no reason to sort of double up there. He says, and no less unreasonable would it be to attribute several truths to the impressions of nature and innate characters, when we may observe faculties fit to attain as easy and certain knowledge of them as if they were originally imprinted on the mind. So this is what I'm going to call the simplicity argument. So human beings have various kinds of ideas and knowledge. I mean, we all agree that we have ideas, we have knowledge. All our ideas and knowledge are capable of being produced via experience. So that's what he's going to try to show throughout the essay, that we can take the experiences we have and use that to show how we gain ideas and how we gain knowledge. He says, but if experience can account for all our knowledge and all our ideas, then there's no reason, it's unnecessary to sort of posit this hypothesis that there's some innate ideas or knowledge that we're sort of born with. And he says, we shouldn't posit any hypotheses beyond what's necessary for explaining the phenomena. So that these simpler theories are to be preferred to more complicated theories. Thus, probably all our ideas and knowledge are produced via experience. So there aren't any innate ideas or knowledge. We just don't need them. And so we shouldn't complicate our theory of how we get those ideas. So whether this argument is persuasive is largely going to depend on whether Locke really can tell a compelling story for how we get from experience to all of our sort of various ideas about the world and how we get our knowledge about the world. All the rationalist needs to do to threaten such an argument is give a single example of an idea or piece of knowledge that we have, but we cannot explain via sense experience. Essentially, this was the way Descartes challenged empiricism and why he was a rationalist. He thought experience lacked the resources for explaining many of our ideas and knowledge. So think back to Descartes' dream argument. The claim was, look, if you just rely on your sense experiences, you can't explain how you get knowledge of the physical world. In the wax example, he says, if you just rely on your senses, you can't explain how you get sort of an idea, a concept of sort of material, physical things, so matter. And in the third meditation argument for the existence of God, he says, look, we have an idea of God. But then he tries to say, but we can't get that idea from our sensory experiences. There's sort of more to our idea than could come from the experiences. All right, so that's all for this video. See y'all next time. Bye-bye.